नमस्ते।
सगरमाथा टेलिभिजनको इन्द्रधनुष कार्यक्रममा तपाईलाई स्वागत छ।
धन्यवाद। तपाईसँग कुरा गर्न पाउँदा खुसी लागेको छ।
You have been to Nepal since 17 years. What has been your observation all these years?
Well, I've seen enormous change in Nepal in some ways, because the first year that I came was the year that the royal family was assassinated. And then I came through several years of the Maoist insurgency and the declaration of the Republic and the formation of a government. And now there is a federal republic with a constitution that's vesting authority in local governments. So these are all very significant changes. But where I haven't seen change is in the quality of life for most Nepalis. There does seem to be an increase in a wealthy minority, but for the majority I would like to see a greater improvement in their standard of living.
How would you define education as a tools for development?
Well, at a very basic level, basic numeracy and literacy are very important for both men and women. So women who have basic literacy skills are better able to care for their children. They're better able to understand what constitutes a healthy diet. They're better able to understand that their children need an education to break the cycle of poverty. So education is probably the single most important factor in bringing people out of poverty.
We have lots of discussion about the quality of education. And when we talk about the community schools situation, people are not that happy. Would you say what kind of basic things in school education we need?
Well, I think Nepal is in quite a difficult situation in providing quality education for all children, and that's because of the topography of the country. So there are thousands and thousands of little village schools high up in the mountains and deep in the valleys, and many of them are not accessible, so that they don't necessarily hear about the innovations in education. They often don't have a teacher arriving at the school for whatever reason. So I think there are many improvements that can be undertaken to improve infants and primary school education, as well as high school and tertiary education in this country. It's a major challenge because once again, there isn't the infrastructure in the education department that's needed to improve the quality of education. And that includes the quality of the teacher education. I've observed many schools here in Nepal, and they still mostly engage in what we call chalk and talk. That is, the children are just sitting passively listening to the teacher talking and writing on a blackboard. Whereas in more developed countries, learning is more experiential, hands-on. Children learn by doing, and children learn by cooperating with each other in projects. So it's not just sitting quietly and listening to a teacher out the front, even though for some lessons that can be quite important. But to really encourage children's deep learning, they need to be active in their education.
How do you define teachers and how to make them engaged?
Teachers do have a great responsibility to instill a love of learning in children, but they also have to understand that children are very different and they learn at very different rates, and sometimes they need a little bit of special attention if they're falling behind in the class. And unfortunately, I have observed some teachers hitting children who have not achieved a good enough score in a test or something like that. And that certainly doesn't encourage children to love learning or to keep coming to school. So I think teachers need to learn special techniques for helping children who are struggling with their schoolwork, and also to support children who are very gifted, to encourage them to extend their learning at the same time. And this can be a great challenge.
How to make such type of teachers? I mean, how to encourage them or force them or request them or appoint such teachers?
Well, I think most teachers have been through the standard Nepalese education system, and so they end up teaching in the way that they've been taught. So it's the responsibility of the teacher training institutions to learn new and better techniques for teaching children so that they can impart those to trainee teachers, and those new teachers can then go into schools and implement these new methods. And those children will then grow up understanding better ways of educating the next generation of children. But I think we need leadership at the teacher training institutes and colleges, and they need to understand and learn about educational techniques that are very effective in encouraging children to learn and to complete their education.
While talking about teachers' situation or bad performance, something difficulties in achieving quality education, school sector blames university teachers who are not giving good quality education to the teachers. So, as a university professor, how all these things goes in Australia?
Well, university professors are considered to be the thought leaders or the intellectual leaders in the country. And it's their responsibility to be constantly studying, researching and imparting new knowledge to university students to improve upon previous efforts, and the same goes for teacher education. So the professors of education in Australia are those who do the research to test particular methods of teaching children and to identify which methods are the most economic and efficient in imparting knowledge to children. And so their students then learn about these new methods and they go into the schools and implement them. So tertiary education is extremely important as a disseminator of new knowledge.
In our context, in university also, teachers go to the classroom and just take a stage and start to give lecture and make a student copy the note they prepare. What type of classroom we can know in Australia?
Basically, students will go to a lecture and there might be many students in that lecture theatre, up to 500 or 600 students. But the very important thing that happens is that after each lecture, there's what we call a tutorial. And this is where the children gather in small groups with tutors to really discuss and understand and apply the knowledge that they've written down from the lecture. And it's in these tutorials that they consolidate the learning that they had in the lecture theatre. So it's very important that we have both of those things. The expert imparts knowledge, the student takes notes, and then they go to the tutorial where they discuss what has been taught in the lecture, and then they apply it, possibly in group work or in project work. So it's very active learning in the tutorial setting.
We hear a complaint from different people that our university or colleges doesn't try research activities.
Yes.
And students don't get project work.
Mm-hmm.
needs to be done? How is work?
I think that is a major issue that does need to be addressed in education at all levels here in Nepal. But at the university level, as I said earlier, it's the responsibility of the lecturers, and at the top of that hierarchy are the professors. So the professors really have to be the intellectual leaders. And in order to be intellectual leaders, they need to be fully engaged in research in their discipline. And they also need to be fully aware of the knowledge that has been gained around the world in their particular discipline, and to incorporate that knowledge into their classes and lectures.
In majority of our subjects, lecturer, professor are lacking all these things. How do you feel if you hear this?
I feel concerned because it means that it's very difficult for a country like Nepal to keep pace with new knowledge, new technology, new learning. And I think, coming back to your very first question about the standard of living, education and technology and research at that high level are going to be very important in solving the problems that you see in Nepal today. Inadequate town planning, inadequate infrastructure, buildings that aren't built to the earthquake code, not enough clean water, so that children are constantly developing gastroenteritis and worms, which affects their growth and their learning. So it's a circle, and every part of that circle needs to be addressed in order to take care of the children of Nepal.
What is university's role to develop the country?
Well, the university's role is to impart cutting-edge knowledge to the new generation of students. And if the students have that cutting-edge knowledge as it stands, when they're a university student, they have a very good basis on which to build further knowledge and to disseminate further knowledge to their colleagues, to people in other countries, and to the next generation.
What do you say about professors? What is their role? As a professor, what do you do in university?
Well, I can tell you what I do as a professor at the University of Sydney. First of all, you disseminate knowledge, so you lecture to university students, and you lecture to undergraduates, those students who haven't yet attained a degree, and postgraduates, those students who are going on to higher study. The second thing I do is supervise students who are undertaking research degrees. And we have many research degrees at the honours, bachelor honours, masters and PhD level. And so professors and other senior academics supervise the bright students who go on to do these major research projects. And we assist them with their research and also to obtain publications from their research. The next thing is to conduct one's own research and to publish the results of that research in scholarly journals. And in the last few years of my work as a professor, I've started to write books to disseminate the knowledge that I've gained over 30 years of being an academic in my discipline, so that my knowledge can reach a much wider community. So even though the books are scholarly, they're based on research and have got lots of references and so on, the books are more accessible to the general population than the scholarly journal articles, which are much more technical. And so when you become a senior professor, so to speak, you want to leave a legacy for the next generation, and you do that by writing books. Other things that I do is I do interviews for the media when new ideas or new research are being discussed. And the journalist will ask, well, how valid is this idea? Is it research-based? Is it evidence-based? Is it something that we can recommend to the public? And so we are what's called public intellectuals. We help people understand the meaning of new research and to form their own judgment about it once they have all the facts in front of them.
What type of competition among academicians in Australia, within university?
It's not necessarily competitive among the academics. Each person is striving to improve on their own performance. But, the concept of having competition between different academics is not something that exists.
Okay. That means every academician is thirsty to present something, to publish, to show something different, new.
Yes, that's the goal of becoming an academic, that you want to improve the knowledge base of your discipline. You want to make a genuine contribution in your particular discipline.
So if somebody is just giving lectures and not bringing new idea, new publication, must feel a little vulnerable or kind of disappointed?
Well, they wouldn't be able to keep their job at an Australian university. Without publications, without research, you would not be eligible to continue. If you don't meet your quota, different universities have different systems, but at the University of Sydney, it's a 3-year cycle. And so in that time, depending on what level you're at, whether you're junior or senior, there are requirements that you must publish at least, for example, 1 paper a year, or if you're more senior, 2 papers a year or whatever. And at the end of the 3-year cycle, you're assessed, and if you haven't met the targets that have been set, then it's quite possible that you won't continue with your employment at that university.
What kind of politics professors do in university? Are they connected with different political parties? Is there trade unionism?
Academics are free to belong to any political party. Because in Australia and in other developed countries, there's a complete separation of government and the universities. So the universities are mostly self-governed. They've got their own governing body, and that's so that they can maintain their independence, because you can't have interference of government with learning institutions. And we see what a terrible thing happens when governments dictate to universities what they can teach. We have freedom of speech in Australia. That means people are free to express their opinions. We do have a trade union movement, but it's nowhere near as strong as it used to be. But the university sector has its own union called the National Tertiary Education Union, and it lobbies the university management for better conditions, better pay, all sorts of things. They are free as individuals to belong to any political party. So there isn't a lobby, to have a group of professors belonging to one party and a group belonging to another party and then they clash. It's nothing like that. It's that they are free to join a political party, but they're not free to bring political influence into the university, because professors are citizens and they enjoy the rights of any other citizen, but they have to enjoy them responsibly because they're thought leaders and intellectual leaders. So they do have a social responsibility that's perhaps greater than other people in the community.
How would you feel when you hear that we have a group of professors coming from a communist background, group of professors from communist or Tarai, and they just influence their parties government to do favor to appoint um, vice chancellor, rector, dean, or appoint professor,
Okay.
and provide facilities to them. How would you react? I mean, what would you feel when you hear this?
I would be very disturbed by that, hearing that, because universities have to function without fear or favour, without any political leanings. I mean, as I said, it's okay for people, including academics, to have political opinions, but it's not okay to bring that kind of political pressure to bear on appointments of academics to universities. Because one of the things that happens, if that's the system, is that you do not get the best person for the position. You get a person who is ideologically committed to a particular political view, and that doesn't augur well for developing thought processes in students to be thinking for themselves about what is the best way to run a government or a political party or any form of social enterprise.
You talked about the leadership. I would like to know about the governance of university, how it is governed.
The university is headed by a vice-chancellor, and the vice-chancellor has to report to a group called the senior executive group. And that's a very large group of people. Some people from industry, from academia, all walks of life, who have some particular type of expertise. And so most of the economic decisions are made by the senior executive group, the running of the university, building infrastructure and all of that kind of thing. Then on the other hand, we have what's called an academic board. And the academic board is made up of senior academics whose role it is to maintain academic standards in the university. So they set the standard and everybody has to meet that standard. So we have a lot of these, it's a self-governing institute. It's not run by the government, but it does receive funding from the government. But the government is separate from the governance of the university.
So how they appoint the vice chancellor?
They have an open advertisement that goes round the world, and lots of people apply, and then a very large committee is selected to assess all of those applications, and then a short list is made, and each of those people on the short list have to give presentations and talk about their vision for the university. And it also is important to look at their eminence as a scholar in their discipline, what they've achieved as an intellectual leader. So there are lots of criteria, and so this very large group then selects the Vice-Chancellor.
That means the Vice-Chancellor is purely responsible for academic sector.
The Vice-Chancellor is responsible for the running of the university, but he certainly doesn't do it on his own. There are lots of deputy vice-chancellors, and each of those deputy vice-chancellors are in charge of a particular portfolio. So some are in charge of teaching and learning, some in charge of science and development, some in charge of international outreach. So there are many deputy vice-chancellors who have very particular responsibilities, and they all report to the senior executive group and the vice-chancellor.
So we talked all these things, and when we think about the situation, it definitely makes a bit disappointing situation. Maybe you also feel some kind of disappointment while staying in Nepal and going back home. What types of thoughts comes in your mind, and what kind of thinking goes along with you.
Well, I think it is very sad for young people to be separated from their families in order to find work. The unemployment rate here is very high, and there are a lot of young people who cannot get work here, so they're forced to go abroad to find work and to earn money. But it is a huge emotional stress on young people to go to a strange place for the first time, away from their families, different culture, different food. And I've seen some of the living quarters in Dubai, for example, of the foreign workers, and it's verging on exploitative in some situations. So I do feel very sad that Nepal can't support its young people better by providing work. I mean, there's so much to do here if we only had the leadership to do it.
Yeah, it's nice.
That's enough?
Anything would you like to?
Kurabani mauka dinubaiko ma dhanyabad.
तपाईलाई पनि धन्यवाद हामीसँग यति राम्रो कुरा गर्नुभयो।